The truth is, there is always one number in your phone you pray you'll never have to use. Mine belonged to Ethan Kane. At 2:03 in the morning, I stared at his name glowing on my cracked screen and realized I had run out of better options. The fluorescent light above me flickered every few seconds, washing the small public restroom in pale blue shadows. My reflection in the mirror barely looked familiar. My dark curls were damp from the rain. My mascara had long since disappeared. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Outside, Seoul was still awake. Cars moved through the wet streets below. Neon signs painted the night in red and gold. Somewhere, people were laughing, eating late dinners, living ordinary lives. I sat on the closed toilet lid and tried to remember what ordinary felt like. 12 hours earlier, everything had been normal. I had gone to work, bought coffee from the corner cafe, texted my best friend about weekend plans. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that should have ended with me hiding in a restroom in the middle of the night, staring at a name I hadn't contacted in nearly 2 years. Ethan Kane. Even thinking his name made my chest tighten. Some people called him a businessman. Some called him a legend. Most people in Seoul lowered their voices when they talked about him at all. The only thing everyone agreed on was that Ethan Kane was not a man you wanted on your bad side. I knew that better than most, because once upon a time, he had known exactly how many sugars I liked in my coffee. Once upon a time, he had remembered my birthday when I forgot it myself. Once upon a time, I had believed I could walk away from him and never look back. The rain tapped softly against the narrow window. My phone battery flashed 3%. I swallowed hard. My contacts list was full of names, coworkers, friends, neighbors, people who cared about me. Yet somehow none of them felt like the answer. My thumb hovered over Ethan's name. I could already hear his voice in my memory. Calm, controlled, dangerous in the quietest way possible. The kind of voice that never needed to be raised. I closed my eyes. Maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe his number had changed. Maybe he had forgotten me completely. The thought should have comforted me. Instead, it hurt. I opened our old message thread. The last conversation sat untouched beneath years of silence. Few simple words. A goodbye I had convinced myself was necessary. My throat tightened. I started typing. Deleted it. Started again. Deleted that too. Nothing sounded right. Nothing felt big enough to explain the fear knotting inside my chest. Finally, I typed 2 words. Help me. I stared at them for several seconds. Then I pressed send. The message disappeared. Delivered. Suddenly the room felt smaller. The silence felt heavier. I watched the screen. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then the word appeared beneath my message. Read. My heart stopped. The phone began ringing almost immediately. Ethan Kane was calling. My hand froze above the screen as Ethan's name filled it. The sound of the ringtone seemed impossibly loud inside the tiny restroom. For a moment I just stared. Then the call ended. My heart dropped. 1 second later it started again. I answered before I could lose my nerve. Ava. That was all he said. My name. No hello. No questions. Just my name in that calm, steady voice I had spent 2 years trying to forget. The sound of it nearly broke me. I covered my mouth and looked away from my reflection. Ethan. My voice came out weaker than I wanted. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Not uncertainty. The kind of silence that felt like someone listening carefully. The kind that made you feel seen even when you wished you could disappear. Where are you? He asked. Direct. Controlled. I swallowed hard. I do not know exactly. Look outside. I walked to the small window and pushed it open an inch. Cold rain drifted inside. Across the street, a glowing sign blinked above a convenience store. I read it aloud. Ethan did not respond immediately. I heard faint movement on his end. Voices. A door opening. Footsteps. Stay where you are. My stomach tightened. Ethan, I do not think this is a good idea. Ava. The way he said my name stopped me. Stay where you are. I closed my eyes. Somehow, after 2 years apart, he still sounded exactly like the one person I could never argue with for long. Okay. Are you hurt? I hesitated. No. Another pause. That was not an honest answer. I almost laughed. Almost. I am fine. You are not fine. His voice softened slightly. You sent me a message at 2 in the morning. You are hiding somewhere alone. You are not fine. The truth sat heavily in my chest. I slid down against the wall and hugged my knees. Rain tapped against the glass. Somewhere outside, a siren echoed through the city. I did not know who else to call, I admitted. The line grew quiet again. I heard him exhale slowly. You never needed another option. My eyes burned. I looked at the floor because suddenly looking at anything else felt impossible. For 2 years I had convinced myself that leaving Ethan Kane had been the right decision. Necessary. Smart. Safe. Yet one phone call had shattered every wall I built around that belief. How long? He asked. How long what? How long have you been sitting there alone? I checked the time. Almost 3 hours. The silence that followed felt different. Colder somehow. Not directed at me. Directed at the fact itself. I heard another voice speaking somewhere near him. Then another. Ethan answered none of them. Listen carefully, he said. I want you to keep your phone with you. Do not leave that building. Do not go outside. Do not get into a car with anyone. Ethan, I am already on my way. My breath caught. What? Ava. His voice remained calm. Unshaken. Certain. Look at the time. I glanced at the screen. 2:08. Good. There was the faint sound of an engine starting somewhere on his end. I will be there before 2:30. The call ended, but somehow the silence felt different now. Less empty. Less terrifying. I stared at my phone screen until it went dark, reflecting my tired face back at me. 2:29. He had given himself 22 minutes. 22 minutes to cross one of the largest cities in the world in the middle of a rainy night. Any normal person would have considered that impossible. Ethan Kane had never been a normal person. I pulled my knees closer and listened to the storm outside. The restroom was cold enough to make me shiver. My damp jacket did little to help. Every few minutes I checked the screen again, half convinced I had imagined the entire conversation. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Maybe loneliness had finally broken something inside my head. Then my phone vibrated. A new message. Unknown number. I frowned and opened it. Are you safe? Another message appeared before I could answer. Ethan asked me to check on you. My stomach tightened. A third message followed immediately. Do not reply. Just stay inside. I stared at the screen. Somewhere in Seoul, people I had never met were suddenly awake because of me. The realization felt unreal. I stood and walked to the narrow window again. Rain streaked the glass. The convenience store across the street remained open, bright and warm against the darkness. A delivery truck rolled past. A taxi stopped at the corner. Everything looked ordinary, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. My phone vibrated again. Another unknown number. Then another. Then another. 3 simple messages. We are nearby. You are not alone. We have eyes on the building. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. For the first time all night my breathing slowed. Ethan had always been like this. Quiet. Precise. The kind of man who solved problems before anyone else realized they existed. It was one of the reasons I had fallen for him, and one of the reasons I had left. Loving Ethan Kane felt like standing too close to a fire. The warmth was comforting until you realized how easily it could consume your entire life. My thoughts were interrupted by the low hum of engines outside. First I thought it was traffic. Then I noticed something unusual. Every vehicle that turned onto the street seemed to slow. Not stop. Just enough to look. To observe. To confirm something. The realization sent a strange chill through me. The city was watching. Not because of who I was. Because of who was coming. 2:32. My phone lit up again. This time there was only one message. Coming upstairs. My pulse jumped. I looked toward the restroom door. Suddenly every second felt louder. Every breath felt heavier. Then, somewhere beyond the hallway outside, I heard steady footsteps approaching. Calm. Unhurried. Certain. And for the first time that night, I knew without a doubt that Ethan Kane had arrived. The footsteps stopped outside the door. For a second, everything became perfectly still. Even the rain seemed quieter. I stood frozen beside the sink, staring at the entrance as my heart hammered against my ribs. Then came a soft knock. Not demanding. Not impatient. Just 2 quiet taps against the wood. My throat tightened. I knew who it was before he spoke. Ava. The sound of his voice traveled through the door like an anchor thrown into rough water. Steady. Certain. Real. I crossed the room before I could think twice. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Ethan stood there exactly as I remembered and completely different at the same time. He wore a dark overcoat damp from the rain. Tiny drops of water clung to his black hair. The hallway lights cast soft shadows across the sharp lines of his face. 2 years had added something new to him. Not age. Wait. Responsibility. The kind that settled quietly behind a person's eyes. For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply stared at each other. I had imagined this reunion 1,000 different ways. None of them looked like this. None of them involved me standing in a public restroom at 2:30 in the morning trying not to cry. Ethan's gaze moved across my face. Not quickly. Carefully. As if checking that every piece of me was still there. You are freezing. His voice remained calm, but I caught something underneath it. Relief. The kind he was trying very hard not to show. Before I could answer, he removed his coat and draped it gently across my shoulders. The warmth surprised me. So did the familiar scent. Cedar. Rain. The faint trace of coffee. Memories rushed back before I could stop them. Early mornings. Long drives. Quiet conversations that lasted until sunrise. I looked away first. You came. The words sounded foolish the moment they left my mouth. Ethan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You called. As if that explained everything. Maybe with Ethan it did. A silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable. Just heavy with things neither of us knew how to say. Finally he glanced around the small restroom and frowned slightly. You stayed here for 3 hours? I did not know where else to go. He nodded once. No judgment. No lecture. Just acceptance of the fact. Come with me. I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of him. That had never been the problem. The problem was how safe I felt around him. Ethan seemed to understand immediately. He always did. You do not have to explain anything tonight, he said quietly. You do not have to tell me what happened. You do not have to make any decisions. His eyes met mine. Calm. Steady. Unshakable. You only have to let me get you somewhere warm. The exhaustion I had been fighting all night suddenly crashed over me. My shoulders sagged. My eyes burned. For the first time in hours I stopped pretending to be strong. Ethan extended his hand. Not demanding. Not possessive. Just there. Waiting. I stared at it for a long second. Then I placed my hand in his. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun I felt safe. The hallway felt warmer than the restroom, but I still could not stop shivering. Ethan noticed immediately. He always noticed everything. We walked toward the elevator in silence. Not because there was nothing to say. Because there was too much. The polished doors opened before we reached them. 2 men in dark suits stood inside. They stepped aside the moment they saw Ethan. Neither spoke. Neither looked surprised to see me. That realization felt strange. As though my arrival had already become part of someone's plan. The elevator descended smoothly. I watched the glowing numbers above the door while Ethan stood beside me with one hand in his coat pocket. Calm. Patient. Completely in control. Outside, the rain continued to streak across the city lights. When the elevator reached the parking level, the doors opened to reveal a row of black vehicles waiting beneath the concrete overhang. Their headlights reflected off the wet pavement like ribbons of gold. I slowed. Ethan noticed. Again. What is it? He asked. I looked toward the cars. This feels unreal. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It disappeared almost immediately. Tonight has probably felt unreal from the beginning. He was not wrong. A chauffeur opened the rear door of the nearest vehicle. Warm air spilled out. I slid into the seat and immediately felt exhaustion settle deeper into my bones. Ethan sat across from me. The cabin was quiet. Leather. Soft lighting. The faint hum of the engine. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The city drifted past outside the windows. Bright signs. Empty sidewalks. Pools of reflected neon stretching across the rain-soaked streets. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. Have you eaten today? The question caught me off guard. What? Food, Ava. His voice remained patient. Have you eaten? I thought about it. Coffee in the morning. Half a sandwich sometime after lunch. Nothing since. My answer must have shown on my face because Ethan sighed softly. I will take that as a no. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Some things never changed. 2 years could pass. Entire lives could be rebuilt. Yet Ethan Kane would still remember whether I had skipped dinner. The realization made my chest ache unexpectedly. I looked out the window. You should not have come. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence followed. Then Ethan answered. You knew I would. I swallowed hard. Because he was right. Deep down I had known from the moment I pressed send. That certainty frightened me more than anything else. A lot has changed, I whispered. Not everything. His voice was quiet. Careful. The city lights flashed across his face as the vehicle turned onto a bridge overlooking the river. For a brief second he looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had carried a weight for a very long time. Then the expression vanished. The vehicle continued forward through the sleeping city. I stared at the dark water below and tried not to think about how natural this felt. Being beside him. Hearing his voice. Letting someone else carry the burden for once. My phone buzzed suddenly. The sound shattered the fragile calm. A new message appeared on the screen. The sender's name made all the warmth leave my body. My breath caught. Ethan saw the change in my expression immediately. Ava, he said quietly. Who just texted you? My fingers tightened around the phone so hard that my knuckles turned pale. I did not need to open the message to know who it was from. Somehow I already knew. Ethan watched me carefully. The city lights moved across his face as the vehicle continued through the rain. Ava. His voice was calm. Talk to me. I looked down at the screen. The sender's name sat there like a ghost from another life. Daniel Harper. My stomach twisted. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized the name immediately. Of course he did. Daniel was the reason everything had changed. The reason I had walked away 2 years ago. The reason I had spent so long convincing myself that leaving Ethan had been the right choice. I opened the message. 3 simple words appeared on the screen. We need to talk. My chest felt tight. Not because of the message itself. Because of what it represented. Regret. Mistakes. The wreckage of choices I could not take back. Ethan remained silent. Waiting. Giving me space. Finally I handed him the phone. He read the message without changing expression and returned it a moment later. That is why you are scared? He asked quietly. I looked out the window. Rain streaked across the glass in silver lines. It is more complicated than that. Then explain it. I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because I was exhausted. You always hated incomplete information. A faint shadow of a smile crossed his face. That has not changed. Neither had the way he looked at me. Steady. Patient. As if he could sit in silence for hours if it meant eventually reaching the truth. I stared at the phone in my lap. Daniel came back this morning. Ethan said nothing. After 8 months. The words tasted bitter. No calls. No messages. Nothing for 8 months. Then suddenly he appeared at my office. The vehicle turned onto a quieter road. The city seemed farther away now. Softer. More distant. What did he want? Ethan asked. A second chance. The answer sounded ridiculous out loud. I shook my head. He said he made a mistake. He said he wanted to fix things. Ethan looked out the opposite window. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And I told him no. The silence that followed felt heavy. Not because of what I had said. Because of everything hidden beneath it. Ethan finally looked back at me. What happened after that? I closed my eyes. Images from earlier flooded back. Daniel waiting outside the office. Daniel calling repeatedly. Daniel refusing to accept boundaries. Nothing dangerous. Nothing dramatic. Just a growing pressure that had followed me all day, until I no longer felt safe being alone with my thoughts. I spent the entire day feeling trapped, I admitted. Everywhere I went, I expected another message. Another call. Another conversation I did not want to have. My voice grew quieter. Then tonight everything became too much. Ethan listened without interrupting, without judging, the way he always had. So you hid? I nodded. And then I texted you. His gaze softened. The city disappeared completely as the vehicle entered a private road lined with trees. Warm lights glowed ahead through the rain. Ethan looked forward for a long moment before speaking. Ava. I met his eyes. You did not text me because you were afraid of Daniel. I frowned. No. His voice was barely above a whisper. You texted me because deep down, when everything fell apart, I was still the person you trusted most. For a moment I could not answer. The vehicle rolled forward beneath the rain while Ethan's words settled somewhere deep inside me. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong. But the truth sat quietly between us. If there had been anyone else I trusted more, I would have called them instead. The gates ahead opened automatically. Warm lights illuminated a long driveway lined with trees. Beyond them stood a modern estate of glass and stone overlooking the river. It looked less like a house and more like a place built to withstand storms. Emotional storms included. The vehicle stopped beneath a covered entrance. Before I could reach for the door, it opened. A staff member stood waiting with an umbrella. Everything moved with quiet efficiency. Nobody asked questions. Nobody stared. Nobody seemed surprised that Ethan had arrived in the middle of the night with a woman he had not seen in 2 years. I followed him inside. The warmth hit me immediately. Soft lighting reflected across polished wood floors. A fireplace glowed in the distance. Somewhere, faint piano music drifted through hidden speakers. The entire place felt calm. Deliberately calm. Like a sanctuary designed by someone who spent most of his life surrounded by chaos. Ethan guided me toward a sitting room overlooking the river. Rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows. A tray with tea and sandwiches appeared minutes later, as if someone had anticipated exactly what I would need. Ethan waited until the door closed before speaking again. Eat something. I looked at the tray and realized how hungry I actually was. My hand still shook slightly as I reached for a cup. Ethan noticed that too. He always did. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence was surprisingly comfortable. I sat near the fireplace while Ethan stood by the window, one hand resting in his pocket as he looked out across the dark water. Finally, I found myself asking the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind all night. Why did you answer so fast? Ethan turned toward me. What? The message. I lowered my eyes to the tea in my hands. It was 2 a.m. He stared at me for several seconds. Then something unreadable crossed his face. Not sadness. Not anger. Something quieter. Because I saw it. Most people would have answered later. I am not most people. The response came so naturally that I almost smiled. Ethan looked away briefly before continuing. I keep my phone with me at all times. For business? I asked. A faint smile touched his lips. Among other reasons. The answer lingered in the room. My heart beat a little faster. There was something he was not saying. Something he had chosen not to say for a very long time. The fire crackled softly between us. Outside, the storm continued across the river. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice lower than before. Ava, there has not been a single day in the last 2 years when I would not have answered if your name appeared on my screen. My breath caught. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Ethan held my gaze for one long second before looking away. And in that moment I realized some people never truly leave your life. They simply wait for the day you find your way back. Sleep should have come easily after everything that happened. It did not. Long after the tea had gone cold and the fire had settled into glowing embers, I remained awake in the guest suite overlooking the river. The rain finally stopped sometime before dawn. The silence that followed felt almost unfamiliar. I stood by the window wrapped in a blanket and watched the city lights shimmer across the water. My phone rested on the nightstand beside me. No new messages. No missed calls. No surprises. For the first time all day, the pressure in my chest had eased. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door to find Ethan standing in the hallway. He had changed into a simple dark sweater, making him look less like the man newspapers whispered about and more like the person I used to know. You are still awake, he said. So are you. A faint smile appeared. Fair point. He stepped inside only after I moved aside. Even now, he respected boundaries in a way few people did. We sat across from each other near the window. The river stretched endlessly beyond the glass. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then Ethan placed a folder on the table between us. I frowned. What is that? Information. Of course it was. I opened it slowly. Inside were printed schedules, business cards, apartment listings, and notes organized with impossible precision. My eyes widened. What is all this? Ethan leaned back slightly. Options. I looked up. Options. You felt trapped today. I do not want you to feel trapped tomorrow. His voice remained calm. Matter of fact. As if spending hours preparing solutions for someone else's problems was completely normal. If you want a new apartment, there are options. If you want additional security at your office, there are options. If you want time away from the city, there are options. I stared at the pages. Every concern I had silently carried was already addressed. Every fear already anticipated. My throat tightened unexpectedly. You did all this tonight? Ethan looked away toward the river. I had help. I laughed softly. That is not what I asked. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely caught off guard. The expression lasted less than a second. Then it disappeared beneath his usual composure. Ava, he said quietly, when you care about someone, you prepare for the possibility that they might need you. The room fell silent again. I lowered my eyes to the folder. Suddenly pieces of the last 2 years began fitting together in ways I had never considered. The opportunities that had appeared unexpectedly. The anonymous recommendations. The problems that somehow resolved themselves before becoming disasters. Small things. Subtle things. Yet now they seemed connected. My heart started beating faster. Ethan. He met my gaze. Have you been watching out for me this entire time? He did not answer immediately. He did not need to. The truth was already written across his face. Not obsession. Not control. Something quieter. Something steadier. Care. The kind that asks for nothing in return. Outside, the first hint of sunrise touched the horizon. Soft gold spread across the river. Ethan followed my gaze toward the growing light. Then he spoke so quietly I almost missed it. I made a promise to myself the day you left. I looked at him. His eyes never left the sunrise. What promise? A small smile touched his lips. That no matter how far away you went, if you ever needed me, I would still be there when you turned around. 1 week later, I stood outside my office building holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The city moved around me exactly as it always had. People hurried to work. Traffic filled the streets. Store owners unlocked their doors. Everything looked normal. Yet something inside me had changed. For the first time in a very long time, I no longer felt like I was carrying the entire world by myself. My phone vibrated softly in my coat pocket. The sound instantly pulled a smile from me. Not because I was expecting a specific message. Because lately there was always one waiting. I pulled out the phone and looked at the screen. Good morning. 3 simple words. Sent exactly at 7 o'clock. Every morning. Every single morning since that night. I shook my head and smiled despite myself. Then I typed a reply. Good morning. Within seconds the dots appeared. Then came his answer. Have you eaten breakfast? I laughed quietly. Some things never changed. Across the river, inside an office tower overlooking half the city, Ethan Kane was apparently still worried about whether I remembered to eat. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and headed toward the entrance. Life had not magically become perfect. Daniel eventually stopped calling. Work remained stressful. Bills still arrived. Long days still existed. But the fear that had followed me for months was gone, replaced by something steadier, something stronger. Trust. Later that evening, I found myself standing on the balcony of Ethan's home watching the sunset paint the river gold. The air was cool. The city glowed beneath the fading light. Ethan joined me a few moments later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me without a word. I accepted it with a smile. Comfortable silence settled between us. The kind that only exists when 2 people no longer feel the need to fill every moment with conversation. Finally I looked at him. Can I ask you something? Ethan nodded. Anything. I stared out across the water. What would have happened if I never sent that message? He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned against the railing beside me. Nothing. I frowned. Nothing. A faint smile appeared. I would have continued waiting. My heart tightened. Ethan looked toward the horizon where the last light lingered above the city skyline. Some people spend their lives searching for the right person, he said softly. I was lucky enough to find mine years ago. I looked away before he could see the emotion rising in my eyes. The river reflected thousands of tiny lights beneath the darkening sky. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then my phone vibrated once more. I pulled it out and opened the message thread that had changed everything. At the very top sat the text I sent at 2 o'clock in the morning. 2 words. Help me. I stared at them for several seconds. Then I looked at the man standing beside me. The man who answered. Before questions. Before explanations. Before conditions. The man who came when the rest of the world felt impossibly far away. Sometimes salvation does not arrive with grand speeches or dramatic promises. Sometimes it arrives with a phone that rings 3 seconds after you ask for help. And sometimes the safest place in the world is not a location at all. Sometimes it is simply a person who never stopped answering.